So good evening, everyone, and welcome to TIE. My name is Karen Malhotra. I'm the Executive Director here, and I'm delighted to see such a great crowd. We have a wonderful speaker tonight and a wonderful program. But before we start that, I always like to give a little bit of an overview of TIE, find out who's in the room, and give you a little bit of our history so you have the context. So first of all, can I see how many members we have in the room? Great. And how many non-members? Great. Patricia. And Morley, you capture all these people as they go out the door and we can sign them up for membership. So just a little bit of a background about TIE. We were born right here in the Silicon Valley in 1992 by a group of entrepreneurs who came to this country primarily from the South Asian region. And they came and with their education and their brains, they became extremely successful. And they didn't have a lot of help, and they got together and said, you know what, we would like to help other entrepreneurs succeed. We'd like to give them something that we didn't have when we came here. And so that's what they did. They started coming together on a monthly basis. They started telling their stories. They started inviting other successful entrepreneurs of their time. And so here we are, 19 years later, with 57 chapters in 13 countries. And the sole mission is to foster entrepreneurship. And so that is our global mission, and we never stray from that mission. So if you're an entrepreneur, if you are supporting an entrepreneur, you're thinking about becoming an entrepreneur, you are welcome at TIE. And so we're glad to see you. We have four stakeholders at TIE. So our first stakeholders, you, our members. Our members comprise of entrepreneurs, professionals, and those folks in the Valley, and mostly technology-based. Then we have our charter members. Excuse me. Now, our charter members are also entrepreneurs, but they're very highly successful entrepreneurs, corporate executives, academics, and they've been invited to be charter members of TIE. And mostly we ask of them a couple of things. We ask of them their time, and we ask of them their experience and expertise and their connections. Is it really sounding that bad?
This is 3 times you did that.
I took water. Okay, Morley, I'll take yours too. I'm all messed up now. Where was I? Okay, charter members. So these folks, we have about 300 of these such people in the Valley, in the Silicon Valley at our TIE chapter. So can I see a show of hands of charter members in the room? And I know who you are. So, okay, so raise them really high. Keep them up. Keep your hands up there. Shamnas, everybody, come on. All right, all of you who are sitting next to the charter members, or you're not sitting next to a charter member, go and find one and go sit next to that person, because this is somebody that you would like to get to know, that you want to know, that has a lot to offer you as an entrepreneur and a business person. So find that person and go say hello. I'll guarantee you they're very friendly and very intelligent and very wonderful people. I'd like to point out a few charter members who are volunteering at TIE on a greater level, and that is our board of directors. So we have a seven-member board of directors. They're all made up of charter members. And today we have 3 board chairs in the room. We have our president, Mr. Vish Mishra. Sorry, Vish, can you stand up? I know you're eating. So Vish pretty much knows everybody in the Valley, and if he doesn't know you, he probably knows somebody who knows you. So I'd be surprised if you don't know him yet. I would like to also welcome Murli Rangarajan, our membership chair. And way in the back, we have Sanjay Mittal, who is our systems chair. And these folks, in addition to all the duties of a charter member as far as mentoring and those things, they give back extra because I ask a lot of them as board members, and I'm constantly communicating with them to do this and do that, and they do it. So thank you very much, and thank you to all the charter members who contribute and make TIE the organization that it is. Our third stakeholder is our sponsor community. Now our sponsors, the charter members are the backbone of our community. The sponsorship is the lifeblood of TIE. These folks donate in a big way to TIE, and without their support, without their financial support, we're unable to do these quality kinds of programs that we do. So we have a whole bunch of sponsors from the VC community, corporate community, service provider community, and we thank all of the sponsors for donating their time, their money, and their efforts to TIE and supporting us all these years. So thank you very much. Now our fourth stakeholder is made up of all of these three communities, and that's our volunteers. The volunteers are really what makes TIE a very unique organization. So for example, all of the programs that we put together are put together by my 4 staff, but we have a core volunteer group of 150, and for TICON we have 300 plus volunteers putting on that conference, putting on the SIGs. Ron Reddy, who is the chair of this, is a volunteer and charter member. All of the SIG chairs are volunteers. So we can't do the programs that we do, we can't do these sorts of really quality events and things that we do without the support of all of the volunteers. So thanks to all of you who have volunteered with TIE, and thanks to all of you who will volunteer with TIE. And some of the programs that we do, you can see here, they're listed. We do a whole bunch of different forums, we do our special interest groups, we have our TIE Institute, which is our educational, hard-hitting program for entrepreneurs. We have our networking mixers, which is purely to connect with other folks. We have our mentoring and startup leadership program. We've launched the new My Story, which is featuring an entrepreneur who has had a very successful exit or IPO in the last 12 to 18 months. And then I wanted to point out one of our programs that we launched last year, which is TIE Angels. And TIE Angels is really a really unique program in that, guess what? It provides seed funding to promising startups. So how many folks are looking for seed funding in this room? Great. So TIE Angels is the place to apply. I really encourage you to apply. It's an online process. If you're interested, go to tiesv.org. Click on that. There's a link for TIE Angels, and it's an online process. Very simple. Or if you have any questions, you can certainly contact me as well. And then I've mentioned the board of directors, and thank the board of directors tremendously for all their support. But really, the work that gets done is due to my small but mighty team of women who are the TIE Silicon Valley staff. And you've met 2 of them at the door. You met Harini with the short hair, and Patricia, who's over there with the longer hair. And I've got 2 others who aren't here today. But really, I thank them for all of the hard work that they do, behind the scenes, after the events are over. So thank you to my staff. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Ram, who is going to introduce our event.
I'd like to take a couple of minutes and thank some of the people who made TIE Silicon Valley's Life Sciences SIG a success. First, I'd like to thank our co-chairs, Ravi Kiran and Reena Mishra. Ravi is here somewhere, I've seen him. Ravi, please stand up. We've also had a lot of help from a select team of members who are active within the community and have given a lot of their time for past programming. I'd like to especially recognize those people. We have Dr. Sanjay Kumar. Where is he? I think I saw him today. There he is. He's sitting in the back. Sanjay, and then doctors Geeta Rao, Ramani Iyer, and Prashant Shah are also very active and need to be recognized. We have an event today that I think is very special and of great interest for all of us here. We've done previous events, few of them in the health IT space, and have seen sold out sessions previously, and we've done a lot of programming at the past 2 TICONs in this same space with great interest. Today, healthcare informatics has emerged as one of the hottest areas for startups in the past 18 months. Our guest speaker this evening, Mr. Mark McCord, is an expert in health IT and leads the space at Oracle. He is currently Regional Vice President for North America, heading Oracle's Health Sciences Global Business Unit. He served in a similar position, a senior position at IBM previously, and he brings a great deal of expertise and vision to our event today. Mark has a BS in Life Sciences from the University of Arizona and an MBA from the Wharton Business School. He has extensive background in healthcare at 2 of the major players in the space, Oracle and IBM. It places him in a distinct position to address our topic today. Without taking too much time, I have the distinct pleasure to invite Mark McCord to the podium. Thank you.
technical assistance? Okay, great. Oh, there we go. Yep. Okay. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for having me here. I really appreciate it. I feel like I need to correct one thing. I don't run the global business unit for Oracle, but I'm a part of the leadership team, and I actually run the field organization for North America. Just to straighten that out. Although I appreciate the promotion. Maybe it's clairvoyant. So I'd like to also take a moment to introduce a couple of other Oracle folks here, because as you ask me questions, if you get very technical, I'm going to defer to the back of the room. So Prashant Kini and Prashant Natarajan are both in the back there, and they're both part of the organization that I belong to as well. They come from our strategy and development group. So I'm used to moving around a little bit, so if I walk away from the microphone, you'll have to extrapolate a little bit of what I'm saying. So I always hate to be called an expert, but thank you for the compliment. That's very nice. If spending a lot of time in the industry makes you an expert, then I guess I am, but I would never bill myself as an expert. But a little bit about me. Ron told you about my educational background. I've been in the IT industry for a long time. In fact, we were having a discussion before I came up here a little while ago. I was mentioning that the first computer I worked on, you had to toggle the address into the front of it. It was PDP-11. So you had to switch, flip all the toggle switches to get the address of the boot register, and then press go, and it would jump there and start executing. So things have changed quite a bit since then. I was mentioning, to me it's magic now, but I don't have an extremely technical role anymore. I'm more on the business side, but boy, things have changed. I started out in the mining and petroleum industry and was doing process control programming, and you'll notice that in my presentation here. And then about 22 years ago, I moved into healthcare and kind of got the bug, and I got hooked. And you'll notice a lot of people in healthcare. How many people in the audience are in healthcare? It's a lot of folks. It's a passion, right? You get into this industry, there's so many interesting challenges, there's so much interesting stuff going on, it's hard to back out of it, it's hard to get away from it. Sometimes it's very painful, but sometimes it's very rewarding as well. Having a degree in ecology and evolutionary biology, I feel much better about working in the healthcare science and health sciences area than I did working for mining. So it's been a great move for me. I wanted to start off with a couple of personal stories that kind of bring this home for me. Back when the big move towards integration on a nationwide scale and interoperability became a big thing in healthcare, and that was probably, it's been in various flavors. It started with CHINs, and then it moved into interoperability, and then HIEs and things like that. But about 10, 15 years ago, the big thing was patient safety, and there was, in I think 2000, there was the Institute of Medicine report released, and it was all about, what can we do to improve patient safety? So I would go around, I was working for IBM at the time, and I'd go around the country lecturing and talking and doing sales pitches about patient safety and how IBM Global Services could put solutions in place to improve patient safety. And they were very successful in that area, so it was a lot of fun. But interestingly enough, my son was a senior in high school, and he got sick. And he wasn't extremely sick, he just had what we thought was a typical stomach thing, and he started vomiting, and he got worse and worse until he got to the point where he couldn't stand up, and he was walking around holding his gut and couldn't move. Took him to the doctor. They did tests on him, and they came back. They tested him for appendicitis, of course, and they said, no, that's not what the problem is. So, and Sanjay, you'll appreciate this from your book, right? So a week later, his appendix burst, of course, and we found out that his lab results had been switched in the lab, which is so ironic, because I'm out talking to customers about how we can help improve their patient safety, and I have it happen to myself. And so I took a couple things out of that. One is, that maybe, I didn't think it was that big an anomaly. It's just an indication of how widespread, how ubiquitous the problem is in healthcare. The second is, I reminded myself never to go around and lecture about plane crashes, because I'm on an airplane all the time, so that's probably a bad idea. So pretty interesting. So to take it one step further, so my doctor is a friend of mine, and lives down the street from me. I've been going to him for a long time. In fact, my wife won't go to him anymore because she doesn't like to undress in front of a friend. So, you know, he was older than me. He is older than me, and I thought, well, I probably need to go to a different doctor because when I'm old and I really need him, I don't want him to be older than me and need a doctor more than I do. So I thought, well, I'll go look for a new doctor. And so I went to the doctor, and I I picked this new physician. I went to a couple of visits, had a physical, and he did a bunch of tests, and he came back and he said, well, you're doing pretty well for your age. And I thought, well, great. You never want to hear anything with the clause after it for your age. So I said, well, gee, you know, that's kind of concerning to me. So I thought I'd get more specific. So I said, do you think I'll live to be 80 years old? And he said, well, let me ask you some questions. So he asked, do you smoke tobacco or drink beer or hard liquor? And I said, no, I don't do that. You know, the only time I drink is, you know, a little bit of wine with customers. He said, well, do you eat red meat, such as ribeye steaks or barbecued ribs? And I said, well, I try to stay away from that. I eat more fish, and so I'm pretty good there. So I guess the answer is no. He said, well, do you spend a lot of time in the sun, playing golf and hiking and boating and skiing and things? And I said, well, no, I work for Oracle, so I don't spend any time in the sun. Never get outside. And he said, do you gamble, drive fast cars, and have lots of sex? And I thought, well, that's an odd question, but no, that's not. The answer to that is unfortunately no, too. So he looked at me and he said, well, then, why do you even give a shit? Interestingly enough, I got that off Facebook. So that one's not true. The story about my son is true. Seriously. So what I'm going to talk about today, and I guess I have about an hour. Is that correct, Ron? Okay. So I'm going to talk about a little bit about the history of healthcare. So how we got started in this space of really thinking about how we can improve making data accessible to physicians and how we can improve the usage of the data. I mean, if healthcare has one problem, it's, you know, although we collect just reams and reams and reams of data, we don't use it very well. So I thought I'd go back in time, talk about how we got into this mess, what things motivated George Bush to do probably the best thing he did in his entire presidency. Talk a little bit about interoperability, secondary use of healthcare data, which is really kind of the theme of the title. Talk about the changing landscape and how things are now, and then a little bit about where we're going. And as you can see up here, personalized medicine is one of those things about where we're going. Now, flavoring this whole discussion is going to be Oracle's perspective on healthcare, and can't help that. I've been there 4.5 years now, and I just can't get it out of my blood. So you're going to hear a little bit about Oracle, and I'll try to keep that to a minimum. So the two basic historic problems in the healthcare industry. One, there's a conspicuous lack of business and market forces in the industry. And if you know healthcare, a lot of you know healthcare, I mean, there's just such indirection and lack of direct force and reaction in healthcare that it's just really difficult to even model the industry, and it's difficult to tell where it's going, and the traditional market forces you would see in a typical industry just don't exist in healthcare, or they're masked by all kinds of indirect relationships. And the other thing is that there have been a variety of issues in healthcare that make it very difficult for it to measure itself, and if you can't measure yourself, you really can't improve. So if I had to pick two basic problems in healthcare, those would be the ones. But they also should be seen, especially by this audience, as two basic opportunities, right? Because there have been lots of niches in the healthcare market and healthcare industry that have come about because of problems that are unique to healthcare and inherent to the industry. And one of the reasons these exist is because healthcare has been kind of a feudal system in the past. Still is a little bit, but it used to be the chief radiologist would buy whatever system they wanted that met their needs to suit the flow of work within the radiology department. The chief pathologist would buy whatever system it was that met his or her needs within the lab, and et cetera, et cetera. So you ended up with a CIO who basically bought the accounting system, maybe, and everybody else came to him and said, hey, I've got this lab system, I've got this radiology system, we need you to make them talk together. And so there was no guarantee that medical record numbers were unique across systems. In fact, I've seen systems where two different clinical systems had the same medical record number for two different patients, just because there was no coordination. So there's been lots of opportunities like that created in healthcare because of the lack of coordination across the enterprise. So the goals of healthcare, the goals of our IT journey into healthcare are pretty simple. We want to keep the patient safe, We want to improve and maintain quality of care delivered. We want to deliver care more efficiently, and we want to control costs and prices to consumers. Easy to say, tough to do. So if I go back in history a little bit, there's a couple things that happened that were pretty interesting. George Bush created the Office of the National Coordinator for Healthcare IT and appointed David Brailer, Dr. David Brailer, who was part of Care Science, who was the founder of Care Science, MD, PhD, really bright guy, appointed him as the first director. And then the other thing that was really unique, I thought, was George Bush talked about healthcare IT in the State of the Union speech in 2004. I think that was the year, which was another thing that was unheard of. Although every administration since World War II has had a healthcare reform agenda, nobody's actually done it. But it really started to become healthcare IT in addition to healthcare in the middle of George Bush's presidency. So. Just a little bit about the healthcare system. So I got this out of Hank McKinnell's book, who was the CEO of Pfizer. So Mahatma Gandhi visited London in the 30s, and this is probably a story that people are familiar with in here. But everywhere he went, there was a beehive. It was like a kid's soccer game. There was a beehive of reporters following him all around London, wherever he went. And at one stop at a press conference, somebody said, "Hey, what do you think of Western civilization?" And his answer was, "I think it would be a good idea." Which of course, illustrates the wisdom of this gentleman. So Hank McKinnell asked himself the same question about healthcare. Basically, he said, what do I think of the healthcare system, right? And his answer was the same. I think it would be a good idea, because we all know that a lot of people in this room are probably engineers. Healthcare is anything but a system, right? If you look at the definition of system, nowhere near. Payers have a different motivation, different end goals than providers, than consumers, than patients, than businesses who need to keep their employees well and safe. So anything but a system. Although over the years, in the past 10, 15 years, it's become more and more like a system. And the reason it's done that, I think, is because there's been an awareness and an awakening of the need for addressing healthcare as more of a holistic viewpoint, looking at wellness, not just looking at episodes of care and treating the symptoms of disease, but rather looking at the cause of diseases and doing some more predictive, progressive treatments. And I'll talk about that a little bit. So where did it hurt? Why did we get started on this? And so a few statistics that I won't go into too much detail on, but I think this is pretty interesting, and hopefully you will find it interesting as well. So in 2004, the U.S. spent $1.9 trillion on healthcare, which, by the way, was 4 times the amount spent on defense for the country. And that was in the middle of the Iraq War. 16% of the gross domestic product at that time, and it was expected by 2015 that we'd be at 20%. And we're probably not quite on track to get there. I think there have been some improvements that have slowed things down, but not a lot. But if you think about that means $1 out of every 5 spent in the U.S. is being spent on healthcare. That's just an incredible number and an incredible risk to our economic well-being as a country, especially when it's not a static state, right? It's growing and out of control. So for that to be 20% of our GDP is very scary. By contrast, Switzerland's was 10.9%, Germany 10.7%. You can see the numbers. And the unique thing, or the interesting thing about this is these countries had, for the most part, socialized medicine. They treated all of their citizens. The U.S., in contrast, still had 46 million people who were uninsured. Basically, didn't have any kind of guaranteed healthcare entitlement. Healthcare insurance premiums were up 9.2% in 2005. And the 5 years before that, they had that kind of growth, 9% per year. So that's incredible compared to if you think about the inflation rate during that time. Employees were paying more of the cost every year, and I've got some numbers about that. And the average annual premiums for a family of 4, $10,800. And that's a unique number, so remember that number. So employment-based premiums increased 73%, so healthcare that was being provided by your employer. So the premiums for that, regardless of who paid them, were increasing increased at the rate of 73% during that 5-year period. So inflation during the same period grew 14%. So tough to keep up, right? We all know this. We probably all felt it, and all probably been upset by our premiums growing and our cost of healthcare growing. But wage growth, same thing. So healthcare is growing at 5 times the rate of other applicable statistics. Started to hit major companies. We started to see layoffs. So here's a quote from General Motors. They lost 1.3 billion in the first quarter of 2005. I mean, it gives you an idea how big that company is. But they cited healthcare as one of the most challenging things that was causing them to have such problems. Remember also, Chrysler was acquired during that time. There was an article, I think it was in either New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, that said something about Chrysler, a healthcare company with car issues, because that's where it was. I mean, at the same time, Starbucks announced, Starbucks has great benefits, so it's a little bit skewed, but they announced at that same time they were spending more money on healthcare benefits for their employees than they were on coffee supplies for their stores. So pretty interesting statistics. So what was the impact to consumers? And here's this number again, 10,800. So while the average annual minimum wage worker in 2005 made $10,712, the average annual premiums was $10,800. It's pretty hard to meet that bill. So you can see why there's a lot of people without insurance. The average employee contribution, 143% up from over a 5-year period. So that's another reason why that person could not pay for health care. So I won't go into all these statistics here, but I think a key one is 46 million people uninsured in the US, 11 million were eligible for benefits, but they just couldn't afford it, so they didn't sign up for them. So they just didn't have them. And a lot of these are kids, obviously. So why does this happen? And I think there are a variety of things I mentioned before. So there's lack of competition. So if you're the best doctor on the block or the worst doctor on the block, you get paid the same amount for the service you provide. And this is changing over time, and it's going to get better, and it's gotten a lot better already. But traditionally, that's been the case. Unless you're killing people right and left, probably nobody would notice whether you're doing a good job or a bad job, because there's so much respect for doctors in this country and worldwide that they're just above question. And yet they're humans, So of course there's going to be variability in how good a job they did or they do, and nobody pays attention to the quality or hasn't been paying attention. And certainly in 2005 they didn't. So there was no accountability, because if you're not measuring and paying attention to quality, you're not going to hold anybody accountable for having high quality. And the reason was because there's no measurability. It's just very difficult to measure somebody's outcomes and quality. You've got to sit down and pour through reams of hard copy patient charts and manually pull out the information that's relevant and put together outcomes from that. It's a 3-4 month process for one disease, one set of patients. So imagine how many different diseases, how many different cohorts of patients you could select that have uniqueness and try to measure that and make that make sense in the industry. And no consumer voice. The consumers basically would follow directions and do what they were told. So another way to put this is, from Mark Twain through his Huckleberry Finn character, well, says I, what's the use you learning to do right when it's troublesome to do right, and it ain't no trouble to do wrong, and the wages is just the same. Great quote, says exactly what I just spent the last 5 minutes talking about. So, brilliant guy. Wasn't talking about healthcare, I don't think. So it's hard to improve what you can't measure, and it's hard to measure without automation. We can't, we haven't been able to measure up until recently, and we're getting to that point now. So I'm going to step back into my younger days. So this is back when I was doing embedded microprocessor control systems, and I still remember how to do that, although nobody, I can't program a Windows environment, but I can do this. So when I started in healthcare, I was really struck by the fact that there was such lack of understanding of how the process worked. When I was in process control, I worked for a subsidiary of Pennzoil, and basically this is a diagram of a crusher system. But basically the way mining works is they blast and they dig up these huge boulders, and they put them through a big primary crusher. It breaks them down from this big down to these 6 to 8 inch rocks. Put those on a conveyor belt, and they go down, and they go through another crusher that breaks them down into 2-inch rocks, and et cetera, down to a powder that's fine enough to get the ore out. And then it goes into a ball mill that has big 20-pound balls, and it grinds it up, and it goes into a flotation device. The good stuff floats to the top, it's skimmed off, and they somehow eventually get it down to a high enough concentration they can send it to a smelter and really come up with 99% copper or molybdenum or whatever they're working on. So the kinds of systems we did were control systems that would control these closed loop processes, and the key word there is closed loop. Healthcare has nothing like closed loop. So it's very simple. The way it works is you have a few inputs that you can change, like belt speed, crusher speed, mantle position, which is the rotating piece of metal inside, kind of rotates in an off-center circle so that it gets further away and closer to the sides and crushes the rocks. So those are the things you can adjust. And so basically, you drop the rock in, comes out the other end, you take a picture of it, measure how big it is, and say, how close is this to my target? If it needs to be smaller, then I slow down the belt, I change the position of the mantle, I change the cycle time of the whole thing, and I go back again and I measure it again. And it's a closed loop, so I can, oops, didn't mean to do that. So I can, with a fairly simple algorithm, I can watch that, I can control it, and I can eventually hit what's called a set point of the right rock size. If it's too big, it's not going to get the ore out. If it's too small, we're wasting money, right? So a very economically feasible way of controlling your costs. Well, healthcare has nothing of the kind. At least it never did before. We're getting to the point where we can get there, but we're not there yet. But it's really all about closing the loop. I mean, how do you get feedback in a timely manner while a patient, we're not even close to being able to collect information on the outcomes of a patient that's in the hospital now and feed that back into the care process and adjust the treatments that we're giving to that patient while that patient is still in the hospital. Even with automation right now, it's still a couple-month turnaround, and the best we can hope for is by measuring the effectiveness of care for a current patient, maybe we can improve the care we provide to a similar patient that's going to be admitted 2 months from now. So, how can technology help this problem? I think that's probably pretty obvious. That the minds in here are going to be working faster than I can talk. But so, the best way to drive the cost down is to inject free market competition into the industry, which doesn't exist today for the most part. The key to having competition is really having informed consumers. What we're really talking about here is value-based purchasing. So if you're a consumer, you need to be able to compare the different aspects of healthcare that are important to you across providers and make a decision based on those aspects, and then thereby having competition. The only way to do that is you have to have transparency of information. You've got to be able to see the information. You've got to be able to get what you need to be able to make that differential choice. Transparency is really meaningless unless you have the ability to differentially measure the cost and quality of the care that's being delivered. So you have to have the finite resolution that allows you to do that. Comprehensive quality measurement is impossible in healthcare without automation. I shouldn't say impossible. It's impossible to do in a timely manner in healthcare to really make a difference without automation. I'm still learning this. And that automation needs to include interoperability. And by interoperability, I mean if you lived in your town where you live, or your city where you lived any length of time, your health record is probably in 4 or 5 different providers' offices. It's probably in a couple different hospitals, a few different clinics. It may be with an employer, it may be with a couple of insurance companies. It's going to be scattered all over the place. So when you go to a new physician, for the most part today, even though there's all this new stuff going on, for the most part, they don't have access to your care record so that they can see what your family history is, what your allergies are, what your chronic problems are, what current medications you're on, a myriad of things that would be helpful in deciding how to treat you, especially if you show up at the emergency room and you're unconscious. Because right now, the primary mode of transportation of your medical record from physician to physician is right here, right? So it's in you, inside your heads, and you're the one that manages it and coordinates across the continuum. And that's changing, but it still exists to a great extent. So the ability to link together all of those different records, or in other words, your virtual health record that exists within the community, is critical. And that's what all of this HIE, Health Information Exchange, and what George Bush was getting at, or at least his advisors were getting at, when they started this Office of the National Coordinator, was bringing together all the data that exists on a given patient into a virtual record so that you can provide the kind of interoperability and measurement of care and make information accessible to physicians who are treating you in the community. So when you go to a new physician, they can connect up to the network, they identify who you are, and out comes all of your family history and all the history of your care that you've been provided with. And what's happening in healthcare is a movement of that management that's up to us or up to my 80-year-old mother, who obviously is going to have a difficult time communicating her healthcare status to a new physician, moving it out of our responsibility realm and into the system in various ways. So again, all about closing the loop. If I clear my throat too many times, I know what's going to happen. So get a couple of glasses of water, but I already have one. So in 2004, President Bush created this office. It was a great thing to do, and it's made a big difference. I think the thing is, it's a really difficult problem. The goal was to establish a nationwide health information network within 10 years and establish, basically make that connectivity a reality. I don't think we're going to make it. It's been, 7 years, and we're not going to be there. But a lot of progress has been made. The idea was to establish standards that would help with these, with the interoperability, to administer seed funding so that we could help get this thing started. Now, the U.S. is different than some countries in that the government has never been motivated to pay for this. I mean, it's an enormous healthcare system, especially in the U.S., and a lot of countries are paying for this kind of evolution of their healthcare, but the U.S. just can't afford it, especially now. We could have afforded it, actually, but we didn't know. And so instead, there's a grassroots effort underway, and basically the seed money was to try to get standards established, get some demonstration projects going, and get the industry started in the right direction. So it was a great thing, and it still is. So the Office of the National Coordinator still exists. It's gone through a few different directors, and they're doing really interesting things. They've been involved with a lot of the funding that's come out of the stimulus package. So basic data collection is, basically the goal and the purpose of a health information exchange. So basically taking data from sources over on the left-hand side of this picture. So all the different source systems within different organizations within a community, optimizing the collection and routing of that information to the appropriate and relevant places, and providing different functions along the way. EMPI is an Enterprise Master Person Index, basically takes different pieces of information from a medical record, and it does a probabilistic match and determines within some confidence limit whether or not we can feel comfortable that this person is uniquely matched to a person that's in our database, and if not, create a new entry for that person. And then cleansing and normalization, can't say enough about that. Healthcare data is collected by departmental systems to serve the purpose of the workflow within that department. So if you're in the lab, everything in the lab system is all about collecting data on a specimen, doing titrations and doing calculations and reporting. It's not about making sure that those data can be used to do analysis across a continuum, right? So when it comes into an exchange like this, from the different source systems, imagine multiple lab systems over on the left-hand side, and every one of those lab systems can have different terminologies that they use. Even if they're the same lab system from the same vendor, they may use different terminology to refer to different lab tests and lab results. Did some work at BJC Health System in St. Louis. They had 4 different lab systems we were integrating together. There were 17 different ways to refer to a urinalysis across those 4 lab systems. So trying to pull that together, and if you're a physician, you can look at that. You can do the simulation in your head and say, okay, those are all urinalysis. I know that, and I can figure out what's wrong with the patient. I can see trends, etc. But if you want to do any kind of programmatic analysis, do analytics on it, or do kind of trending, those have to be normalized into a common terminology, put in the same column in the database, so that they can be dealt with as the same measurement. So that's what normalization and cleansing is about. When you hear people talk about semantic interoperability, that's what that's about, is providing that a semantic integration and normalization across different data sources. And as you might imagine, Oracle's strategy is to store it in a database. So this is important, and a lot of people didn't get this. Most people agree that this is the way to go now, that you need to store data. The main reason is after you do all the cleansing and normalization, you don't want to have to do that every time you go get the data, so put it in a data store somewhere so that you've got it in a normalized form and it can be used from there. That's the primary reason, but there's also performance issues and logistics, etc. One of the first instances of this kind of exchange was in Santa Barbara, and one of the problems they ran into was physicians had systems that needed to be part of the health exchange, they'd go home for the night and they'd turn off their computers. So they'd have, 8, 12, 15-hour delays in getting data, and there'd be errors, and it just didn't work. So normalized persistence, I think, is important. So I guess I didn't talk about the far right there. So basically, once you get it in this format, you've got it available for reuse, and you can use it for various different things to do analytics. You can deliver it to the point of care so that physicians can get data on patients that is relatively real-time, near real-time, and be able to treat them better. And you can also store it for retrospective analysis as well. So looking at a community exchange, that was the basic building block. If you take that building block and you put it in between provider organizations and payers and consumers and public health agencies and employers, et cetera, on both sides, now you have something that can collect data, store it, and serve it out to all the different stakeholders and constituents. So this is what health information exchange is basically about. No big surprise here, right? So what's happened over the last 10 years, 15 years is when we first started looking at this, interoperability was all about community health exchanges or statewide health exchanges or the nationwide health information network. What we've come to realize as an industry is that there are various levels at which you can do interoperability. If you look at the first level down there, healthcare organizations or clinics and hospitals, there's a big problem with interoperability or lack of integration just within a given hospital or within a given enterprise within the same corporate boundary. It doesn't have to be 10 different corporate entities across a community that need to exchange data. This is just a problem in healthcare. It's always been a problem in healthcare because of the feudal nature of the industry as it started out. So we're starting to see a shift, and I'll explain why in a minute, toward this second layer there of enterprise HIEs or interoperability within an enterprise. So where has this come to today? The National Coalition on Healthcare made a recommendation in 2009, make the system less complex, reduce overly high prices, and create a truly competitive healthcare marketplace. So nothing new, right? We've been saying that for more than 10 years. So here's some statistics. I won't go into these because I don't want to, in the interest of time, I want to get to some of the other stuff, but suffice it to say, things have not changed a lot. There's still, close to 50% of lab tests are duplicates for a variety of reasons based on lack of data. 13%, up to 13% of patients are admitted to the hospital unnecessarily because there just isn't the information to rule out serious conditions. And we still have a lot of these same statistics. I got to looking at this $4.4 trillion number, and I thought it was pretty interesting. You could travel constantly at 100 miles per hour for 475 years. And that would be equal to the distance of $4.4 trillion laid end to end. It would take you 475 years to get there, so pretty interesting. And lots of useless statistics like that. So as I mentioned, I won't go through this in detail, but the interesting number there is 98,000. So the Institute of Medicine estimates that 98,000 people a year die unnecessarily from preventable medical errors. That's 2,000 a week, or 11 people that would die during the hour that I'm speaking of here because of preventable medical errors. So that's improved, but I don't think it's improved appreciably. It's been a problem for a while. In fact, Sanjay wrote a book about it. And 2 books, right? So the healthcare industry has not changed a lot, but there has been a lot of change motivated by various things. HHS and ONC through the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, because the economy fell apart, they got a lot of money. And so they put $19 billion into healthcare as part of the ARA initiative, and that's basically to provide automation and interoperability and better use of the systems we have out there. So they created this term called meaningful use. Who's heard of meaningful use? Okay, everybody that raised their hand about healthcare probably is still raising their hand about meaningful use. So basically, meaningful use is about the efficient use of electronic medical records. So they put in place a set of guidelines that are progressively going to be implemented over this year and the next 4 years that basically measure how effectively physicians and other healthcare professionals utilize electronic medical records. And it's really about how well they communicate and interoperate, so do the things that I just talked about, plus adding analytics to that to measure how effective they are in the way they provide care. So big term, everybody in healthcare these days talks about meaningful use. It's almost gotten to the point where it's kind of an overused term now. Nobody wants to talk about it anymore, but the concepts are very valid. So to be meaningful use compliant is important. Right now, there are measures that as a healthcare entity, if you meet meaningful use compliance, you get a bonus at the end of the year based on your percentage of your Medicaid reimbursements you get. And I think the bonus is equal to 2%. As this evolves, it's going to change from a 2% bonus to up to a 15% penalty. So if you imagine somebody like Kaiser and the volume of business they do, the typical organization, healthcare organization, does about 40% Medicare and Medicaid. So you take 40% of somebody like Kaiser and then give them a 15% penalty on that 40%. That's a big chunk of money. So the healthcare industry is very feverishly trying to get these things implemented so that they can comply with this meaningful use need. So what that's caused is, as I mentioned before, enterprise HIE. So a movement from interoperability in the community, which is still there and still being pursued aggressively by communities, but there's much more interest within, the healthcare organizations in the world to provide enterprise unique interoperability. So within my four walls, within all the hospitals of Christus Health or Banner Health or Sutter Health or somebody like that. So that's become very important. And one of the reasons it's important is because meaningful use is requiring analytics. And the analytics can't be done unless data can be brought together, integrated, normalized, cleaned up, transformed, and made available for use to do analytics on, and probably fed into some kind of data warehouse or persistent data store. So, as I mentioned, analytics is hot. Connectivity only gets us partway there. There's great benefit to delivering data, information about a patient to the point of care. There's an even greater benefit in making it available for doing analytics. There's a vast amount of data and a vast amount of value that you can get from understanding that information better. So that's what's called secondary use of healthcare data. So primary use is obviously in the lab or in radiology or at the patient bedside. Secondary use is really taking that data, making it usable, uplifting the value of it, and being able to use it for other things. So in this PwC survey, they asked these different entities if they expected to use secondary data in the next couple of years, and you can see the percentages are pretty high. So analytics, this is an overview slide. You guys have probably seen this if you're in healthcare. But basically, this slide is trying to say that displaying the information for the physician or the healthcare professional at wherever they work is only a small piece of the problem. A much bigger part of the problem is how do you get the data from the source systems, bring it together, make it usable, and provide it to those dashboards. So in other words, how do you get it out of the source systems on the left and transform it and go through the process that gets it into the dashboards on the right. So here's the Oracle advertisement. So current systems in the industry right now are siloed. So there's several analytic products out there on the market. Very few of them talk across domains. So clinical data, financial data, operational data, et cetera. They're all either clinical or financial or supply chain, et cetera. So what we think the industry is doing, what we're seeing a lot of interest in from our customers that we talk to, is what we call integrated view analytics, and basically that's bringing the data together, and it basically justifies, in my mind, the need for an EDW or data warehouse that can store multiple domains of data and make it available so that you can ask questions that are cross domains, such as these here on the right. How is our nurse overtime policy affecting our ICU quality measures? And that's a tough question to ask right now, but if you can integrate the data, it's a simple thing, and you can see the other ones as well. So that's the basic idea. So there's a couple of different companies that kind of buy into this strategy. This is at the crux of Oracle's healthcare strategy in this space, but it's also, there's a couple of small startups that are doing this. IBM basically follows this strategy, but it's not productized. Microsoft has a similar strategy to this, but they spend a lot less time doing the transformation and data normalization and cleanup at the front end. They do it at the back end when you pull it out for the usage of it. But basically, the functions are the same, it's just the mechanism that's a little bit different. So the idea here is you pull the data, just like an exchange, you pull the data out of the different source systems, you provide the transformation, in fact this slide shows it better. You provide the transformation, same kinds of things, MPI to uniquely identify patients, uniquely or normalize terminology across the different source systems, normalize units of measure, et cetera, and pull that data together and store it into a staging area or a data store that can be made available for analytic applications. And the way that Oracle does this, and we feel like this is the best way, is kind of a hybrid approach where we have a third normal form data warehouse that we put data into. It's not intended for applications to hit that data warehouse. It's basically a staging area where we can push the data out and put it into area-specific data marts that support analytic applications on the front end. So by doing that, we get rid of the problem of unique data across different source systems not being integratable. So we do all the normalization, semantic interoperability, and pull it together and make it available for tools. And the way we do this, we basically try to do it in a standard format so that our partners and customers can also follow the same kind of strategy, or what we call our EHA application architecture. And the result is we've got